Welcome to the 358th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Stay tuned for my interview with William Schreiber, author of the novel Someone to Watch Over. Stay tuned for the interview. The Reading and Writing Podcast is brought to you by Libro FM. Libro.fm lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 185,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, but you'll be part of a different story. One that supports your local community and your local bookstore. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. You can listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Here's your special offer from the Reading and Writing Podcast. Get 2 audiobooks for the price of one today with your first month of membership with the code RWPodcast at checkout. This offer is only valid for new members in Canada and the U.S. Check out Libro.fm today. Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is William Schreiber, author of the novel Someone to Watch Over. William, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your novel, Someone to Watch Over yet, how would you describe the novel?
Someone to Watch Over is a family saga set in the South. It tells the story of a woman named Lenny Riley whose life was derailed when she was a teen, living in a small town in the remote foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. And she has spent the last 25 years kind of running from that past in the far reaches of Alaska. But she returns home to try to reconcile with her estranged father, who had forced her to give up a child for adoption when she was in high school. And there's kind of a mystery surrounding, that adoption and the events leading up to it. And when she gets back, to the Smoky Mountains, a little town called Moseley, she learns from her estranged brother, John, that their father has died, taking with him to his grave the answer to a question that she would desperately love answered. And that is the whereabouts of her child, which she feels she abandoned to the world, and was powerless to do anything about. So when she discovers the rumored existence of a different kind of angel in the Appalachian Mountains called Gardican angels, who can supposedly reconnect deceased parents with the children they left behind, she sets out to find one in hopes of reconciling with her father across the Great Divide and learn from him where she might be able to find her child. And so she sets out to find that angel with her skeptical brother John, who isn't buying any of it. He's kind of an engineered, tightly wound guy, and she hopes to rebuild her relationship with him as well. So it's about family reconciliation, and there's heartbreak, but ultimately it's a story of hope and families learning to reconcile and come back together.
So do you remember the original idea that led you to write Someone to Watch Over?
Oh, yes. It was inspired by the death of my own father unexpectedly, and my family asking me to write and deliver his eulogy. And I felt overwhelmed by the task. It was the hardest writing I had ever done. And it remains so to this day because I felt overwhelmed by the task of capturing the last formal words, spoken of him, when I realized that I only knew him as a dad from the time he was about 30 years old. And he had an entire life, before me and my 4 siblings entered the picture. And you never think to ask, questions about your parents' childhood and what their dreams were and what their hopes were growing up, because you're kind of out there building your own life. And I realized, too late that I would probably never get to really, well, I would never get to ask him those questions. And so I entered the eulogy by recalling family vacations that we used to take when I was a kid. You know, we would load up in the station wagon, and living in Florida at the time, we would go to these little mom and pop um, tourist attractions. And one that I remember specifically is not in existence anymore, is Six Gun Territory near Ocala. And so the story seed came from the brother John wanting to retrace a childhood vacation in memory of his father, whom he realizes he didn't know as well as he knows his own clients. He's a successful engineer in Knoxville, and he wants to try to rediscover a magical moment that his dad experienced watching a space launch when he was a boy and his father was a young man. And so he and Lenny, who has a hidden agenda, set out to retrace this childhood vacation they had taken together with their dad. And along the way, they learn how to be family again, and they learn what the true meaning of family is when the trip becomes something more than they ever thought it would be.
And so is it correct that you wrote Someone to Watch Over first as a screenplay before you wrote it as a novel?
I did, yes. I wrote it when I was living in Athens, Georgia, and it had gotten some really good response in terms of it had won or placed as a finalist in a slew of screenwriting competitions at film festivals around the country, and had the good fortune of finishing as a quarterfinalist, which is the top 5% in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Nickel Fellowship in Screenwriting competition, which is probably the most competitive screenwriting competition in the world. And so what that told me is that I thought I had a good story there because it was resonating with people. And I tried to get it made as a film, and I'm not a producer, so I don't have, all of those skills. And, getting a film made takes a small army of people. And I tried my best, but ultimately ran into a wall with it in about 2008 when the economy collapsed and the independent production shingles of the studios closed. And it just so happened that there was a writer's strike at the same time. And so the town was, basically paralyzed and locked down. And I hit an emotional wall with it, trying to get something done with it as a screenplay. So I set it aside for a number of years and worked on some other things and wrote some other bigger screenplays, because this is a kind of an intimate screenplay, a small screenplay by Hollywood standards in terms of budget. So I wrote some bigger things, and my agent shopped those, and it was just a tough time. So I kind of set all of that aside and worked on, other things, making a living and so forth. I'm a freelance writer. I went to the journalism school at the University of Florida, and so I've been a writer for a long time. So then I thought, you know what, I couldn't put this story out of my mind, so I decided to create a novel out of it, because one of the frustrations as a screenwriter is that is not the final form in which that story is supposed to be experienced by an audience. There's no music, there's no motion, there's no facial expressions. It's a broad brush stroke that is brought to life in a whole different medium. So I set out to write a novel and create the movie in readers' minds by, instead of broad brush stroking everything, painting every little nib and tuck of the canvas. And so that's what I set out to do, and that's what I did. And I feel fortunate that it's being responded to well again, which I think just encourages me that there is a story there that people are relating to. And I think it's because it comes from such an honest, emotional place from my own experience.
And so how did you first get interested in writing screenplays?
Well, a friend of mine who was a producer in Florida, small, independent producer, knew a director who was trying to get a film made, and he needed a screenplay. And so the producer called me while I was living in Athens, Georgia, and asked if I would like to write a screenplay about a big city boy from New York who's being groomed to take over his father's corporation. But with one last summer vacation, comes down to a small Florida beach town and learns from a group of kind of comical retirees how to follow his own dream. So it's a coming of age family story, and it was produced. Miracle of Miracles. It had Ernest Borgnine in it, and Artie Johnson and Bill Cobbs, and it was distributed internationally. It's called Captiva Island, and that was a blessing and a curse because I thought, well, that was easy. I wrote a screenplay and it was produced, so I'll just write another one and get it produced too. And that's not the way it happened. So it was a heck of an experience for sure. And so I started writing screenplays, and I've always been described as a very visual kind of writer. So I think maybe I gravitated toward that that platform, and only came into writing novels a couple of years ago, which is about how long it took me to adapt this.
So when you did that adaptation from the screenplay to a novel for someone to watch over, what was that experience like for you? What were the differences that you found between writing a screenplay and writing a novel?
It was very interesting. I came to understand that the difference between the two storytelling platforms is that screenwriting is writing a story from the outside in, and novel writing is writing a story, at least the ones that I write, character driven from the inside out. Because in a screenplay, you're essentially, what you're laying down on the page is what the camera sees, and you're able to jump between characters and suggest emotional reactions to something that was just said or done. And the writing is very economical. You have a slug line, which, interior or exterior, what the scene is, a craftsman house day, a couple of lines of description, and then you go into the dialogue. But in the novel writing, what I learned was working with an editor, because I knew there were things I didn't know, was that POV, needs to be in this type of close third person emotional story. It needs to be consistent, and you can't obviously jump around between characters in terms of their perspectives, because it distances people from the story because they don't know who to come into the story through. So one of my big challenges was learning to think about POV in a different way. And the other one was to know how to paint an entire picture, still being economical, not going on too long about it, just give the reader enough to whet their imagination and let them smell and see something, and then, move on. So I think the main difference is, approaching this story, especially character-driven stories, from the outside looking in as a screenwriter and from the inside looking out as a novelist.
So what are your earliest memories of reading and books and storytelling?
We would go to the library as kids over the summer, and I was definitely into the, like the Hardy Boys, and Clive Kessler was another one I liked because he wrote about kind of adventures on the ocean, and I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico, so big water was always interesting to me, and he wrote about submarines, and I always thought that was a really kind of magical and dangerous world, because you could be crushed at any second. And I also read, kind of in the middle school years, Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven and Cask of the Amontillado, and I just think that I like to feel something, and it was scary reading, no doubt, for a kid. But from that, I wrote my first story, kind of riffing off the Cask of the Amontillado, and it won an award in like sixth grade or something like that. And I had walled my sister up in her in the bedroom wall, like in the Cask of the Amontillado, and we get a kick out of it now. But So, it was the Hardy Boys and Clive Kessler, Edgar Allan Poe, that sort of thing.
So, given your experience now writing both screenplays and this novel, what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels?
Well, one thing I've definitely learned is that you need to enjoy the journey of the writing, because what happens after that is somewhat out of your control. And the journey is, exploring your story ideas and getting yourself onto the page and saying what you want to say and enjoying the ride and enjoying your characters and, learning about them and going places with them. Um, I would say that be careful of chasing the market, because usually by the time you get there, the market's changed directions or is not the market you started out chasing. And I have to say that the book world, novels, the pipeline, the pipe is so much bigger and the opportunities are so much greater to get your stories out there than the screenwriting world, which has consolidated tremendously over the past 10 years. And it's unless you're writing $300 million comic book epics, which, is very few and far between. I think there's going to be more frustration probably trying to make it as a screenwriter than getting a novel published.
So, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Nonfiction. I recently read a kind of a crass and funny history of Seattle called Sons of the Prophets, Profits, which has been interesting. And I also just finished reading White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, because I needed to read that and try to understand, what is happening in our country right now, and what role I play and what role I can play.
And so, are you working on a new novel or screenplay now?
I am. I'm working to create an outline for a sequel to Someone to Watch Over, in which Lenny and how can I say this without a spoiler alert for Someone to Watch Over, in which Lenny and others return to the small town in the foothills, and it's a town that's run by kind of a heartless enterprise, family-owned enterprise dating back generations, in the foothills. And she goes back to take them on because they were part of what derailed her life and sent her spiraling in a bad direction. And she spends the story rebuilding and getting back to a good place.
So, how have you found the pandemic impacting your writing?
Well, I'm a writer by profession anyway. I mean, I have clients that I write for, and it's not, creative narrative writing, but I'm used to sitting alone, in front of a computer. And so that hasn't changed that much, but it weighs on your mind every day, when the news just keeps going on and on and on, and we can't seem to get a hold of this like we should. And I think it can create a lot of negative energy that, storytelling can help you kind of escape from. When you're writing a story, I get lost and that becomes the world. So it's really beneficial, I think, for me to keep writing and keep focused on, stories, to kind of find my way through this, and hopefully we will soon.
So, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your novel, Someone to Watch Over?
Sure. I have a website, williamschreiber.com. Last name is spelled Schrei, B as in boy, ER. And I'm on Twitter at Bill_Schreiber, and Facebook at William Schreiber Author.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with William Schreiber. He's the author of the novel Someone to Watch Over. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And William, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great.